So was there some moment where you decided, because you're talking about your run-ins with state security, you're always kind of open-minded, wanting to learn, trying to understand the deal. Was there some point where you decided, I'm ready to say things which are clearly not going to work with this subtext that you're describing?
When I first started saying things about China, this was probably 2012, 13, something like that. And I was reading what people in New York City and Washington, D.C. were saying about China. And I was like, this is just not based in reality. This is not what is going on the ground here. And this is one of my very common frustrations with a lot of what is written about China coming from Washington, D.C. and New York City, is these people have just not spent either any time in China or Vietnam, or if they have, they've spent a weekend at the Four Seasons meeting with senior executives from major companies or senior officials from the Chinese government. And having been to some of those nice hotels in Beijing and Shanghai, as well as other Southeast Asian countries, in a way it doesn't matter where you are, because a Four Seasons is still a Four Seasons, a Ritz-Carlton is still a Ritz-Carlton. So you're not actually gaining really much of any information or knowledge about the country, and it was not reflecting what I was living on the ground in China. And that's when I decided to start writing about what I was seeing and witnessing in China.
I think I remember, noticing some of that, and I was thinking, wow, like this guy's actually doing this? How long is this going to last?
I always had the mentality, if they ever came to me and said, okay, it's time to go, okay, it's time to go. And so, my personal identity, my professional identity was never bound up in, maintaining that access. And actually, I was talking to someone who, had to leave China and is not welcome back. And they said, one of the things is that when you deal with China, you have to accept the risk that you will lose those relationships, that you will lose that access. But the price is that if you're going to maintain that, you have to say, accept, or do things that will eat at your conscience. And so I entered into it saying, hey, if they don't like something I write and they want me to leave, okay, there it is, no big deal. I've had fun. And so, I think I started really writing about China in 2012, 13, and I think I left in 2018. So to a degree of credit to China, they actually, let me stay quite a while in relative terms. To a degree of credit to my boss, the dean at my school, I'm pretty sure he went to bat for me a number of times to keep me there, and I probably would have been, outed sooner if not for him.
What would be an example of something that you were seeing on the ground as a reality? Maybe like the most stark example that you can think of that, you saw, but New York and DC were seeing a completely different picture.
One of the things that pops to mind was one of the first papers I did, and this was probably 2012, 13, 14, I forget the exact timeline, but inflation was definitely running significantly higher. And this was at a time when one of the questions, there was a lot of suspicion that maybe Chinese data wasn't entirely accurate, but, people were going to let it slide. And so I was looking around at price hikes in China that were significantly in excess of the 1% to 2% inflation that they were reporting. And so I was able to, go out and, say, guys, this just isn't what you're seeing on the ground. When I was in China, just to give you an example of inflation, the prices, by Chinese standards, I was in the top 1%. But the average price was probably far in excess of anything real estate price-wise that you would see in Manhattan or San Francisco, Silicon Valley, you name it. And so when they were talking about how great the economy was and consumer spending and everything, and they were taking a lot of these figures as given, to be able to go out and at times take pictures of prices and say, guys, this doesn't make any sense. I think that provided credibility and on the ground service, and I do think it is harder with a lot of the journalists that have been kicked out that aren't able to go out and do that and being pursued and surveilled the way they are today.
Fascinating. Tell me about the data then in China. Can we trust it?
So
how does it work?
There are a couple of answers to that, and I'm going to tell a couple of anecdotes. I was meeting with somebody who was a government official in China. This was before the crackdowns, really started taking place. And I was told a story that somebody else that they knew that was another government official in a local branch of the Statistics Bureau got busted for selling the real data. They were selling the real data to people. This was at a time period when the corruption crackdown was really just starting to take off. So I asked this individual, I said, well, did they get busted for corruption or national security? And they said, oh, national security. We can't have that information out in public. And so just to hear the confirmation that there was real data and the fake data, I think was quite eye-opening from an official. They know very clearly the targets that they have to hit. And there is enormous pressure to censor upwards. We always think of censorship as going downwards to the people, the state media and things like that. But there is also enormous censorship upwards of, how information gets conveyed upwards. Nobody goes and tells their boss, hey, we had a bad year this year. I think that is the first thing to keep in mind, that yes, there are absolutely different sets of books. I mean, Chinese authorities famously treat them as if there's two different sets of books. One of the things, however, that has become much harder for China is to fabricate data to such a degree that it doesn't match with other data. Let's assume you have a coal mining province or a town, or a province that has lots of steel. Okay? Well, how do you make steel? You burn a lot of coal. Okay? What happens when you burn a lot of coal? You have lots of air pollution. So if we, for instance, can measure that the air is very clean this year, what likely didn't happen? Well, we likely didn't burn a lot of coal. Well, if it's a coal province, or if it's a cold province, or if it's a steel province, and you're not burning coal, that likely means that economic activity was down. What you're trying to do is you're trying to reconcile things that are much harder to fake to things that are easy to fake. So if those two numbers come close, and we're not looking for exact matches, but as long as they're generally moving in the same direction, of similar magnitudes, we say, okay, close enough. To borrow from the old supermodel phrase, I don't get out of bed for less than 5%, okay? So what you're really trying to do is match data that the government publishes which is very easy to manipulate, to data that is very difficult to manipulate. Air, lights, things like that. We can measure air by satellites. We can measure lights, okay, by satellites, okay. There's different things, but you're trying to reconcile very manipulable data to very difficult to manipulate data, and that's actually become a lot harder for China. And the reason is, and so when I hear foreigners say, oh, well, Chinese data is actually pretty accurate, I say, Chinese don't believe Chinese data. And the reason is that basically every firm in China has gotten into the data business. Because real estate firms, okay, like simple real estate firms, realize, wow, I'm just leasing apartments. I actually have tons of data on how many empty apartments in my province there are. That's valuable data to people that are studying the real estate industry, going, how many empty apartments are there? How often are people moving? If people are moving, they probably need transportation services. If people are moving, they're into new apartments, they're going to be buying couches, they're going to be buying refrigerators, things like that. And you see this with lots of firms. You see it with real estate. You see it with shopping malls. You see it with, Union Pay and Alipay and all these guys, okay? So that, if there's more transactions every month on Alipay, we probably can say, yeah, consumer spending is going up. So there's all these ways that people are inventing, and what this is telling us is that the Chinese don't believe Chinese data.
Well, it's almost like a data black market.
Yes, and not only is there this legal market of data, there is a very thriving black market of data in China in different ways. Whether it's, if you know somebody at the National Bureau of Statistics that will sell you the real data. Chinese markets are widely known for abnormal price movements before big announcements, whether it's like a quarterly earnings report, whether it's like the grain reserves, things like that. It's widely known that these markets in China move in ways they shouldn't if there was a data blackout. Okay, so there's absolutely a thriving black market for data in China.